So anatomy, you either love it or most of us actually just hate it. It's actually quite hard to learn all of it, the root of the median nerve and all of that jazz. But you sort of need to know it if you're going to be a medical student, if you're going to pass, if you're going to become a doctor, if you're going to become a surgeon. You need to know your anatomy. So we're going to be talking about our experiences learning anatomy, how we smashed anatomy. With all due respect, I smashed anatomy and I'm happy to say that. And we're going to talk about what's the best ways to actually smash anatomy. What's the best way in 2023 to smash and remember all of your human anatomy? So Abdul, let's take it away. We both went to King's, right? What was your experience like learning anatomy in the first years?
So as a medical student, I loved anatomy in the sense of the human body, learning all the muscles, all the bones. I found it fascinating. However, I didn't like studying it. I didn't like sitting the exams. It's more those things I really enjoyed learning about the human body. The cool thing about us and going to King's is we did dissections, cadaveric dissections, people that donated their bodies for research and scientific purposes. And we got to go to the dissection room and really see anatomy. And at the time, Professor Harold Ellis, who was a leading surgeon. So anatomy was incredible. It was fascinating. It's just when it came to sitting exams, I hated it. You did well. You smashed exams. I didn't do as well. So maybe this video is all about you.
No, what are you lying for? Anyways, talking about anatomy, this was at a time when I wanted to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. You wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. So we actually had to learn anatomy really well, right? So the first way that I think before actually going into learning anatomy, we need to talk about learning in general, okay? Right? We need to talk about the right ways of learning. And people need to learn how to learn before they start learning. It's so important. Stop wasting time. Just learn how to learn first. Now, step one, I always talk about active recall in general, okay? There's a few videos talking about, the negatives of active recall, but the hard and fast rule is that testing yourself, testing that muscle to be able to recall knowledge works way better than just passively reading. What do you think about it? You've experienced it? What do you think? What's your views on that?
So I agree with you. It's important to know how to learn, how to study before you actively start learning, revising, studying. So going back to what we did, or what I did, at King's, we had loads of lecture notes, a lot of the anatomy broken up into upper limb, lower limb, neuro, pelvis, thorax. And we really had a good book from Dr. Hunter, Alistair Hunter, and that really broke it down. And it was, for me, kind of the stuff of going through the book, using a few tools and resources, and trying to memorize it in a repeated fashion. And looking back, it probably wasn't the most effective way. I learned the anatomy, I did well in the exams, I got through med school, obviously. But when you look back, and it's about studying smart, not hard, right? So active recall, I think, is an excellent way of testing yourself, having kind of those engineered breaks, engineered moments where you go back and recap, right? Otherwise, there's no structure, there's no schedule, there's no guidance.
Exactly. And point number 2, we're not going to bang on this too long because there's too many YouTube videos on this. But point number 2 is all about spaced repetition. You can watch a whole YouTube video on that elsewhere. But just recapping that, I remember on placement sitting down and making your calendar. Okay, and the concept was spaced repetition. The idea that you need to space out your revision topics, you need to space out what you're learning, when you're learning, so that it's optimized to be able to recall it, right? What did you think of in terms of your pattern, your timetable when it came to revising and learning?
Yeah, I think having a timetable is important because anatomy is so varied. It's in-depth at times. There's a lot of content to consume. You definitely need to have some sort of revision timetable, a revision table where you understand, okay, I'm going to be doing upper limb, lower limb, X amount of stuff. I need to break it down into bite-sized micro-learning type things and kind of stick to it. Otherwise, if you try to learn anatomy as a whole, from the top of the head all the way to the toe, you're not going to do it. You're going to fail miserably.
Exactly. And the intervals at which you repeat it at is quite important. You can't just learn hand anatomy and then expect to pass an exam next year. There's a natural decay in your knowledge, so you need to disrupt that. I'd highly recommend watching a few YouTube videos on learning styles and how to learn. Do that first. That's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to go over how you can make your life easy to learn anatomy. Okay, let's start with number 1. You said notes. You talked about Dr. Alistair Hunter's book. What was great about that book? So when people are looking for a resource, looking for text-based resources, right? What was so good about that?
So the reason why I loved his book and his revision notes was it broke down into the big sections: upper limb, lower limb, neuroanatomy, and then each page was very succinct, high quality, and it just focused on either muscle, either the tendons, the bones, and it gave the added explanation that this muscle does this bone does this, right? It wasn't like Grey's Anatomy. I know everyone bangs on about the Grey's Anatomy book, and it's like this thick, and it's super colorful. There's a lot of content jam-packed in one page, and it's overwhelming.
Exactly. I think that's the mistake I made. So a lot of people might have done this already, actually. So as a keen med student, I went out and I bought Grey's Anatomy, which is this big, and then is it Atlas Anatomy, which is this big or something like that. And it's just overwhelming. There's like so many lines, so many colors, so many different diagrams, nothing you can picture very well. So I think what was so great about Dr. Alistair Hunter's book at the time was that when you're reading anatomy, when you're looking at images of anatomy, you need something simple. You need something that's not overwhelming. You need something that when you're just looking at the ligaments, you only want to see the ligaments. You don't want to have arrows showing you also the tendons and showing you also muscle groups and nerves and the vasculature and all of that. You want to learn it in a clean fashion. So when you're looking for a resource, you're looking for something clean. Now, not everyone has Dr. Alistair Hunter, but we'll talk about a resource towards the end of the video. So reading text-based, we want something clean, something that's not overwhelming, something that's just not all over the place, okay? The next thing that we had was cadavers that we were learning from. Talk to us about your experience from that.
So the learning from dissection from these cadavers, even the pro sections, was good because it's tangible. You're really seeing the muscles, the bone that you've read physically in front of you. And sometimes seeing it, like being a visual learner, is important, right? I still remember some anatomy. I remember the thorax, even kind of the rib cages, breaking it open, going through the different layers. You need that added. I think when it comes to learning, you need to activate as many modalities as possible: visual, hearing, and obviously the dissection room. It smelled of formaldehyde like you were gonna faint, right? Yeah. That's probably why I remembered it. But it was a very privileged way of learning anatomy.
Absolutely privileged. I think cadavers is so good. It's about that visual. I think what it is that it stimulates so many different areas of the brain. You're cutting if you're doing dissection, or if it's prosection, you're directly looking and peeling back the layers. You're getting to look directly at the anatomy of the human body. So one area that I struggled with is understanding the neck anatomy and understanding pelvic anatomy. It was so difficult to understand it from just images, and I'll put 2 images here so you can see why. But when I got to dissect into the neck, dissect into the pelvis, suddenly I understand how this neck anatomy works. Because images just showed like a sheet of muscle. But how does a sheet of muscle just sit here? Right? Where is it connecting to? Where is it connecting to in terms of my jaw and everything? You need to know that. Right? So when you're doing dissection, you're getting to see exactly how it is. You're getting access to basically peel back those layers, see where the vessels are running, see where the nerves are running. You get to see all of that live time, real time. So I think cadaveric teaching is actually incredible, and it's a privilege for the donors to do that in particular. So we've talked about that. And then there was the next hype that we saw at medical school that everyone did. I went out and bought it as well, which was flashcards. What was the flashcards useful for you, first of all?
Yeah. So the Grey's Anatomy flashcards were very good because it was bite-sized. It was split into different topics. It was colorful, but the information wasn't overwhelming. So some of the difficulties with learning anatomy is you don't know where to start. And when you do start, it gets very overwhelming very quickly. You don't do it in enough time. So when it does come to exam times, like you mentioned, you realize you haven't remembered anything, right? So it was a very good way of learning things, testing yourself as well. And you could do it in a group study environment. Like I remember we used to test each other, right? Cool. This week we're going to learn the anatomy of the hand. We're going to test each other on the muscles, then the bones, then the ligaments.
Exactly. So we did that in groups, and also used to do it privately as well. So flashcards are great. Whether you're using digital flashcards, physical flashcards, they're great because they present your brain with an image and you're having to identify it. And you need to know it. You're examined like that. You're examined either given a picture and it will say, what is that? That's exactly what a flashcard does. Or you're given the name of a whatever and you said, the question is, where does that attach to? What route does that follow? So you get to test yourself actively. So talking about going back to active recall and spaced repetition, it's an easy way to get revision in small chunks of time. You might be on the tube. You don't have time to pull out a textbook. You don't have time to do all these things, but you've got time to just look at a bone and just decide what are the points, what are the insertion points, where do the nerves run through, right? So flashcards are a great way to just test yourself in small chunks of time, and a great way, I think personally, of the whole spaced repetition, ensuring you remember it. Otherwise, you lose anatomy so quick. So that's flashcards. Anything else that you use to supplement your knowledge?
So I was never a big fan of them, but some people found them useful was models. So there was the skeleton models, the kind of models of the brain which you can buy. I get it's tangible, it's physical. Maybe it's because we had the dissections. And sometimes it does make sense. Like, we had the model of the brain, you break it apart, you can get to see the hypothalamus, the occipital, the different cortex in the different zones. But I was never a big fan of them because I just felt like too much was going on once again. But I think the most important thing for me and for other people and students learning is you need to find what type of learner you are, how you learn best, and basically find the modality or the way in which you can test and reinforce that knowledge.
So whilst talking about physical models, there's digital models which work really well now. So now I found that the platforms are able to show you a 3D image of the bone. Before it was 2D, right? Now you can use your mouse and you can rotate the thorax, you can see into the pelvic cavity, you can see into the skull, and all of these platforms, they're doing really well at that. And I think actually looking at models rather than just looking at flat 2D images really helps you to understand the motion, the movements that are created, right? Because at the end of the day, we're 3D. The human anatomy is a 3D object, right? You need to understand, why is the bone shaped like that? Why does the muscle attach to that point? Because like I said, remember, if you understand anatomy, it frees up your space for having to just memorize it. You can work it out, right? So if you understand why the bicep tendon attaches to that particular point, you understand why that movement comes about, right? So I think understanding anatomy, understanding movement is also very important. And understanding the way the nerves move and the vessels move through which path, right? There's a reason why the vasculature moves a certain way, or where the brachial plexus comes from, right? So understanding anatomy is great. I think models are great, whether it's digital or physical. I personally prefer digital. Some other people will prefer physical. Moving on from that, right? Though I think one of the most powerful ways of learning anything is through quizzes. It's why we at Peerr, we do quizzes, right? Quizzes is important because it simply just tests you and tests you and tests you. And when you get it wrong, you get the whole effect. I forgot what the effect is called. Do you remember it? It's the hypercorrection effect, actually. So when you get something wrong, you remember it like really well. You remember really well that you got it wrong and the right answer is X, Y, and Z. Yeah, so quizzing yourself is a great way to learn anything, but learning anatomy is just a great way to consolidate yourself. Like, did you do quiz banks?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Quiz banks, online platforms where it gets to test your knowledge is super important. It allows you to reinforce it. And I think the beauty of these digital platforms is you can go through a lot of content very quickly. Because it's not physical, you're not doing pen and paper, you're smashing out the quizzes, and you can really test yourself to a level where you're confident and you know you've reinforced the knowledge. So when it does come to exams, you are smashing it.
Absolutely. I think on the note of quiz banks, I then found video banks to be quite important. So what is a video bank? Video bank is you want someone like Dr. Alistair Hunter, someone who's an anatomy specialist, going through the anatomy, pointing it out. What you find is that textbooks sometimes and flashcards will just give you, like, it was like the Oxford handbook for me, right? It just gave the information, didn't explain it. You didn't really understand it. But when you've got an anatomy expert, suddenly things start to make sense. And it's the whole concept of, if you memorize something that you don't understand, you forget it quicker. But if you start to understand it, if an anatomy expert is teaching you, you just love it. It's why we used to love the anatomy demonstrators, right? We used to love them because they were surgeons, most of them. And the surgeons really understood the anatomy, and they really just explained why things were designed the way they were. And it actually really made you sort of sit in awe at the way the human body is designed when you really understand the anatomy. Any other ways you can think of that we studied anatomy to smash the exam, to hit the top decile? This one actually. This is something that we did. The group study. I think sometimes sitting in a circle, quick fire questions, or when you're just chilling out with a mate, hey, why don't we just revise some anatomy quickly, and a quick fire session of the thorax. Again, it's the whole thing of quizzing, right? You find that you just elevate yourself in terms of remembering all the anatomy content that you need to remember for exams. Anything to add on to that?
I think one way learning anatomy was imaging. So when you learn how to interpret chest x-rays for Oscars and stuff like that, you then get to appreciate anatomy, and it reinforces that learning. Because when you're learning anatomy, you approach it in a different mindset. But when you see on a chest x-ray, you then value the bones, let's say the scapula, the trachea, the esophagus, all those different things. But because you're learning to interpret a chest x-ray, you subconsciously also learn the anatomy, and all the stuff reinforces. So I think testing yourself or compounding your learning using different ways is a very good way to learn anatomy.
So talking about anatomy now, we've covered a few. So we've talked about when you want to look at text, you want it to be simple, not overwhelming. When you look at pictures, it can't be everything thrown at you in one go. When we're talking about flashcards that you can use to test yourself in small spaces of time. We talked about cadaveric dissection, prosection. We talked about anatomy experts showing you anatomy and helping you understand anatomy through video banks. We talked about quiz banks, allowing you to test yourself constantly, get you into that exam mode. Talking about all of those things, I want to talk about our friend Joao. Our friend Joao has brought all of these elements together, essentially. All right. Why don't you kick it off? Let's talk about Joao a little bit. We interviewed him on our Scrubbed In podcast. What do you think about what he's done? Talk about that.
Joao was one of our recent guests a few weeks ago, and he's one of the co-founders of Kenhub. And one of the reasons as to why we resonated with him a lot is he, like ourselves, has a passion for medical education, really wants to innovate in the space. And he did a lot of stuff early on in his career before co-founding Kenhub, which now has over, millions of people around the world learning anatomy. But one of the reasons is he's got this drive, this determination, this real passion to innovate, to make the learning experience so enjoyable for Kenhub. And that's one of the reasons why we're happy to kind of work with them, partner with them, and kind of recommend them as a learning platform. Why? Because for AMS and me, it's the founders. The founders guide the way a platform is, the way a product is. So we can spend ages talking about the platform in terms of what Kenhub does, and we'll probably touch on it for people that don't know about it. But I think his resilience, his grit, and it's that curiosity to learn. Not everything went his way, but he was so eager to learn and teach others.
And don't forget how Joao started. He started by teaching anatomy through video back when it wasn't even a thing. And he's only taken it step after step after step forward. He's innovating, he's taking it forward. I think what's unique about Joao, his outset and his sort of mind and the way he thinks is that he understands anatomy. He really understands anatomy. He really understands how to learn anatomy and how people should be and can learn anatomy. And that's why the numbers speak for themselves. If millions of people are using a platform to succeed in anatomy, what does that tell you? I'm not telling you one person used it to succeed in anatomy. I'm not telling you 10. I'm not telling you 100, not thousands, millions. And they're successful in learning anatomy. So if you are watching this and you're a novice, you've just walked into the world of having to learn anatomy, what would that millions mean to you?
It's validation, it's credibility, right? If I know there's a platform like Kenhub with millions of people learning anatomy and people like Joao who really understand anatomy, it goes back to people, you learn best from the people that really have a passion for it, that really have a genuine understanding of the subject matter, right? Mm-hmm. And it goes back to one of the videos we said where when you're a junior doctor and you have medical students following you around on the ward run, if you genuinely want to help with medical education and training, those students can sense it and they want to stick around. They don't randomly after a bit say, hey, do you know what? I need to rush off to teaching. To get into the nitty gritty of Kenhub, why is it great? Well, it's by experts. These are people that have studied anatomy, that have a passion for it. It's got loads of videos, right? And obviously we live in a tech savvy world where people want to watch these videos at different speeds, right? And I don't want to shout at any people, but you know who you are, right? And it's time stamped. You can go to different parts of the video for different topics. And we are big fans of quizzes. Obviously, from Peerr is there's a variety of ways you can test yourself with quizzes, right? There's clinical scenario exam quizzes. There's quizzes you can do which test the spelling, because it's very difficult remembering all of these words because they're obviously based originally from Latin. There's also exams and images, but it brings all the different ways and techniques of studying anatomy together. And the reason why we love it is we've met Joao. We've met the team behind Kenhub and we know why they're doing it. And that's the most important thing when we do recommend and kind of talk about the different platforms.
Exactly. So I think you've hit the nail on the head. And I think I just want to emphasize that the bit about resources being overwhelming, right? Those thick textbooks, those flashcards out there, they can overwhelm you. And what I was really impressed, what I really fell in love with when it came to looking and exploring the Kenhub platform is how it's simplified for you. Your brain, if you want to take in and just understand where the nerve travels, it's an easy way to learn. It's not overwhelming. It's not showing you everything in one go and saying, just keep your eyes on this and follow along. No, it makes it easier for you. The fact that it's led by experts and the fact that the whole company's got Joao leading it, I think that's why we love it, isn't it? So I would highly support you guys all checking out Kenhub. We'll link it in the description below. It's a platform that millions of people are using to succeed in anatomy. Millions. It's not one, it's not two, it's not thousands, it's millions. I'll let you judge what that means. Any lasting remarks?
No, I think it was fun to have Joao as a co-founder of the platform and then to be able to talk about the platform, test it for ourselves, and then be able to be like, hey, do you know what? As a medical student, as a pre-med, if you really want to smash your exams, then definitely Kenhub needs to be part of that study revision, study technique.
Absolutely. So there you have it. Anatomy, how we learned anatomy, what things were good about anatomy, and how Joao has brought all of the good things together, essentially, to build this platform called Kenhub. Check them out because they've got millions using it. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.